From Interfaith Alliance, this is State of Belief Radio. I'm your host, Reverend Welton Gaddy. We first met Zach Copeland over 2 years ago, I think, when, as a Baton Rouge high school student, he launched a campaign to, quote, repeal creationism in response to a loosening of rules regarding science curricula in Louisiana public schools that introduced the possibility of religiously driven intelligent design material being presented as scientific fact. He's been on this show numerous times since then, and today, as a student at Rice University, Zach Copeland continues his activism. And as he and fellow activists relaunch their campaign this spring with a call for nothing less than a second giant leap for humankind, I'm very pleased to welcome Zach Copeland back to State of Belief Radio once again. Zach, welcome. You've been keeping busy, man.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
I'd like to get a quick overview, if I could, on how we've gotten to this point in terms of science education in Louisiana and what gives you hope for change in this legislative session in that state.
So in Louisiana, the Louisiana Science Education Act passed back in 2008. For anyone who doesn't know, it's a law that allows supplemental materials into public school science class to critique politically controversial, not scientifically controversial science like evolution and climate change. And we know exactly what it's for because the sponsor of the bill, Senator Ben Nevers, said it was for teaching creationism in the classroom. So we know this is just a backdoor way to sneak non-science into public schools, which is unconstitutional and bad for science. That passed back in 2008. When I was a senior in high school in 2010, I had known this law was bad. I wanted to fight it. And one day I just got started and we launched a repeal. It's been a few years. We now have 78 Nobel laureate scientists on board, many others, major science organizations, the full New Orleans City Council, and 2 defeated attempts to get this law out of committee in Louisiana. So despite all this incredible support from scientists around the world, we've got a long, tough fight ahead of us passing this bill. We lost 2-1 in committee last year, so that gives us a lot of hope. We just need to switch one vote over from the other side to our side, and we get out of committee, and who knows what happens in the full Senate. I'm pretty hopeful there. So especially, we've also had a lot of attention directed at this bill this year. We're very hopeful to see what happens this year.
Zach, talk a little bit about your brilliant idea of having Nobel laureates involved.
So that initially started back when the campaign first began. For anyone who doesn't know, Barbara Forrest, who was my mentor, Barbara Forrest is a brilliant scholar on creationism, has documented the creationist movement for many years, was an expert witness at the Kitzmiller trial, which invalidated intelligent design creationism. She happens to live down the street from me and has mentored me in my project. And I asked her, could we bring on some exciting big-name scientists onto this campaign, like Nobel laureates? And she said, reach out to Sir Harry Kroto, who's a Nobel laureate chemist at Florida State. And I sent him an email. He set up a conference call with me, and I had written a letter to from Nobel laureate scientists to our legislature. He set up this call, agreed to help me on it, and the next day I found he'd already started me off with 10 signatures from Nobel laureates in support of repealing the Louisiana Science Education Act, and we just started building from there.
Tell us a little bit about the boycott of Louisiana by the Society of Integrative and Comparative Biology.
Yeah, so the Society of Integrative and Comparative Biology, just like scientists around the world, were disgusted by Louisiana's law. And so a lot of organizations didn't want to boycott New Orleans and hit the city after Katrina, but the Society for Integrative and Comparative Biology felt like someone had to take a stand. And so they had a scheduled convention in New Orleans. They pulled their convention and boycotted the city. And actually, they boycotted the entire state, is the important point. They said they weren't going to come back to Louisiana. And so recently, the good news is the New Orleans City Council has unanimously endorsed a repeal of the Louisiana Science Education Act. And last winter, the Orleans Parish School Board, in reaction to the Louisiana Science Education Act, banned all creationist material from their schools. And so because of that, the Society for Integrative and Comparative Biology, which probably going to bring about $3 million into New Orleans, has lifted their boycott of New Orleans and New Orleans only. They're not going to come to Lafayette. They're not going to come to Baton Rouge. They're not going to come to Shreveport. But they will come back to New Orleans because of the pro-science steps New Orleans has taken in our fight against the Louisiana Science Education Act. And so we're back being considered for them, and they'll hopefully come back to the city because the city has taken some very good pro-science steps.
Zach, I'm always just astounded at the way you've been able to do your studies and keep up with your activist work as well. Zach, I also today want to spend a little time talking about what you have learned in these past couple of years about being a young activist, because as important as this campaign in Louisiana continues to be, there are a lot of people of your generation that have a hard time imagining that anything they do will make a difference. Yet here you are. You've testified in hearings. You were on Bill Moyers. I just saw you on Bill Maher. And it's not about some kind of celebrity status, but rather about being an effective and persistent voice for what you believe. So what I want to know is, what was it that made you first say, I'm going to try changing this thing? And also, in the face of setbacks, what keeps you saying, I'm going to get going on this again? We're going to change it. What's doing that in you?
So for me, it's always been a perfect storm from taking on this law. I mean, it doesn't, you wouldn't believe it, but when I was even a junior in high school, I was beyond shy. I was afraid. I couldn't talk on the phone to strangers. I couldn't even email strangers. I was shyer than you could ever imagine. And so somehow it's transitioned for me in the year following. And the first step was always the hardest, I think. And I just, something clicked, and I realized what I'm doing is right. I know it's right. I believe in my heart it's right. And I shouldn't be afraid to stand up and speak out. And once I realized that I have a cause that someone needs to stand up for, and if no one else is standing up for it, I have a duty to do it. I took that step and got going, and suddenly things just went on their own. I realized I can do this. So that's the thing, is once you get over the first step, when you choose, hey, I really care about immigration advocacy, for example, and I don't know where to start, but once you start, it just falls into place. Yeah. The next thing is just being determined. I mean, the way I think about things is I'm going to work 80, 90 hours a week, every week. And the majority of the stuff I try, it may fail. I may have a great idea. I may put a ton of effort into it, and nothing happens. But you just have to keep doing that, because if you don't, nothing's ever going to happen. And you eventually get your break. You eventually pull that one vote in committee that you didn't think you could get. You get on Bill Maher and get 1 million people to see your cause. You eventually build, you get Nobel laureates on board, and that just sometimes when you put the work in, you have to be lucky, but you have to create your own luck in some ways. And then the other thing is, for me, it was almost naivete that helped me. A lot of people, when you think about it, would say, oh, I shouldn't email, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to email Nobel laureate scientists. And in retrospect, as a high school kid with no one behind him, with no name recognition at all, I was a random high school kid from Louisiana, and I emailed hundreds of Nobel laureate scientists. And in retrospect, maybe that wasn't appropriate, but it was clearly the right thing to do, because they listened. They said, this kid is right. We shouldn't be teaching creationism. We're going to support him. And it was just take that risk and hope that if you're doing the right thing, people will join you.
You also, and I just want to underscore what you said, you also have had the valuable help and support and education that Barbara Forrest was involved in, and yeah. You are, for a teacher, a sign of hope and a source of excitement to see a student take it as you have and run with it. Let me ask you this: what do you wish you had known when you first got involved in activism that you now know?
I would actually say nothing, because honestly, for the shy kid that I was, if I had known I'd be having to speak out publicly in meetings and hearings, that would have scared me at the time. I didn't realize that. I just thought my simple calculation was taking on this law is right, and so I'm going to take it on. And that was all I needed to know. And that was the best thing to start me off. It's the mentality I've tried to keep. I'm going to do what I believe is right because it's right, and I don't have to think beyond that. Yeah. And I knew that beginning, and I hope there's nothing I learned that will take me away from that point.
Well, that's a great answer. I remember one of the first times you were on State of Belief, and it was early in the campaign, and I think one of the first interviews we did was you had a cell phone walking across the campus of the high school. Now, you can't tell me, can you, that at that point you thought you'd be on Moyers and Marr?
I had no idea. I mean, you look back and you're like, you could have never seen this coming. I mean, it's also gotten to the point where when I started this fight, I just thought it was a Louisiana thing.
Yeah.
And over the last few years, I've realized this isn't just Louisiana. I care deeply about my state. I love it. I want to help fix it. But we're only 4 million people, and there's a lot bigger problems in America with science. I mean, we have a copycat law in Tennessee, bills introduced across the country. Another favorite topic of us to go after is school vouchers that are funding creationism.
Right.
That really needs to change. And then another big thing that I've gotten very interested in is funding for science. We just cut $50 billion from our science budget over the next 5 years. That's just going to decimate science in America. And I think we need a total reversal of that. So this is a much larger fight now for science than I ever realized when I was first beginning. And I realize now this is a fight that we have to have. And we have to do something to change this.
I tell you what, I think, Zach, it's safe to say, and I think you would agree with me, that as long as Bobby Jindal is our governor, we're always going to have plenty of issues to take on.
So I said this on Bill Maher the other day, which is Bill asked, do you remember when Bobby Jindal said the the Republican Party shouldn't be the stupid party? And he had, Governor Jindal, I'd love him to put his money where his mouth is. And I would love him to back the repeal of the Louisiana Science Education Act. Help lead the GOP. He called it the stupid party. He has the chance to lead the GOP out of that. And it would be a wonderful decision on his part. He's a very smart man, and I hope he decides to back us this year. I think you'd be. I mean, I hope you're with me on hoping he does the right thing this year.
Yeah. What would you say, Zach, to a young person who's in high school right now or just starting college, who feels strongly about a particular issue but doesn't really even know where to start to work for change? What's your advice?
Luckily, these days we have the internet. So if you have an issue, you can probably Google the experts on it and just send them an email. Because the odds are, it doesn't hurt you if they don't respond. The worst thing is you're in the same place. And just find a mentor, find someone who is an expert on this issue and just ask them for advice. Okay,
let's say the Louisiana State Legislature acts this section exactly the way you wish they would, problem solved. What happens next? Do you try out for the Owls there at Rice, or are there other issues that you want to take on?
So the issue that I don't think is ever going to change is the science funding one. I think that's going to be our entire lifetimes. And honestly, science denial too. I mean, if we repeal this law in Louisiana, I'm going to be thrilled. And we have to start working on Tennessee right after that. We have to make sure we're on constant alert to make sure Oklahoma doesn't pass the creationism law, to make sure Montana doesn't pass one, Colorado, and just keep these out of the bill. I'd love to see a national level legislation or an executive order, maybe from the president, that would help prevent these creationism laws from ever really existing again. We'll just say we're going to teach established evidence-based science in science class. And then again, pushing science funding. Because I want to see $1 trillion in new science funding. And a thing to mention, we need to change the debate on science funding. Because there's a lot of talk about how we're in a climate of we should just cut because we have a huge deficit. Why don't we think when a company buys a factory, it's an investment. They go into debt to buy the factory because it'll pay itself off. You'll make money. There's a return on that investment. Same with science. We can borrow money to pay for science. As the president mentioned, the Human Genome Project offered $140 to one on that. We can borrow many times over and pay for it with that project. It's an investment we have to make, and it's dumb not to make it.
Zach Copeland is a second-year student at Rice University who continues to work to remove religion-based teachings from the Louisiana public school classroom. You can follow his work at repealcreationism.com. And you can use the search function at stateofbelief.com to hear Zach's earlier interviews with us on State of Belief Radio. Zach, I wish you continued success in getting this done this year, because it continues to be a cause for concern and really of embarrassment for many of us who hail from Louisiana. But more importantly, because it can serve as a model for how to organize in opposition to popular but misguided intrusions of religion into our secular society. You have set a model for all of us, regardless of age. Thanks for being with us once again, and I hope we'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much. And also thank you for the incredible work you're doing all the time.